Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. For more than 4 decades, the Cato Institute has produced original research on immigration, showing a freer, more orderly, and more lawful immigration system creates a freer, wealthier, and safer country. We see people as the ultimate resource, that given the freedom to thrive, people, regardless of birthplace, are a benefit to our society. Unfortunately, the U.S. immigration system is so narrow and so backlogged that most people who want to come to this country have no legal way to do so. They have no line. As a result, the U.S. ranks in the bottom third of wealthy countries for its immigrant share of the population. This restrictive system is harming our communities, from the largest cities to the smallest towns. The worker shortage, averaging nearly 10 million open jobs per month, has cost the U.S. nearly $1 trillion in lost productivity in the last year alone. Population decline is eroding tax bases in cities both large and small. Nearly 3/4 of America's counties had more deaths than births in the last year. And U.S. population growth is the lowest it has ever been in our entire history. This restrictive system also causes illegal immigration, which can tear apart communities when employees, employers, and spouses of U.S. citizens are deported. Immigrants are not undermining the safety of U.S. communities, just the opposite. Census Bureau data show that legal and illegal immigrants are half as likely to end up behind bars as U.S.-born residents. During the 1990s, when the immigrant population grew faster than it had at any point in over a century, crime fell rapidly. It fell faster and further in immigrant-dense communities. About 350,000 immigrants serve in protective occupations as police officers, detectives, and private security. Immigrants work with police to solve crimes. About 315,000 immigrants right now are awaiting status based on their cooperation with local investigations. And there are countless examples of U.S. communities turned around by the economic revitalization brought by immigrants. Immigrants increase state and local tax revenues by over $250 billion per year, more resources to keep communities safe. The committee is right to investigate the scourge of fentanyl deaths, but immigrants are not the cause. Fentanyl is overwhelmingly smuggled through ports of entry, largely by U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens accounted for 86% of convicted fentanyl traffickers in 2021. Despite arresting over 700,000 illegal entrants so far this year, less than 1% of CBP's fentanyl seizures have come from people carrying it across the border illegally. The restrictions on trade and travel that started in 2020 have only exacerbated the problem. Because fentanyl is 50 times more potent than heroin, it can supply the same market with far fewer trips. So with fewer trips and more scrutiny in 2020 and 2021, traffickers switched from heroin to fentanyl, and fentanyl deaths doubled. Border policies have failed victims by making drugs more potent and deadly. Congress should focus on helping drug users, not banning immigrants. The crackdown on asylum under Title 42 has also failed to secure the border. Now that requesting asylum is no longer an option, evasion of Border Patrol has increased 5-fold from 2019 to 2023, forcing immigrants to cross in more remote, more rural areas of the border has led to more suffering and death, which is straining rural hospitals. We have seen repeatedly that closing off legal options to immigrate creates illegal immigration, while opening them up reduces it. The administration's new parole sponsorship programs for Cubans, Haitians, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans are already working to reduce illegal migration by those populations by over 90%. These programs empower ordinary Americans in every community to help fix the border. Congress should work with them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Beer. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called for after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Before I start, I just want to share a few things because it's been talked about this being a decades-long problem. It has been. There's no doubt there's been a problem. But in the entire previous administration's 4 years, 2.4 million encounters. In just 2 years, we've had 4.7 million encounters, 1.2 million gotaways. I can do that math, 5.9 million people. 25 states in the United States have populations less than 4.6 million. Let that number sink in. And the removal of the policies on day one, the executive orders that were written and reversing policies implemented that solved many of this, or really began to solve this problem, were done away with. And a surge of people came to our border. And the drug cartels have taken advantage of the situation by the neutralizing effects that I talked about in my opening statement. It was also mentioned earlier about the humanitarian problems from previous administrations. I remember sitting in this committee right over there when I was a freshman, and there was this big to-do about 2 migrant deaths. We weren't in charge at that time, but it was a big hullabaloo because there were 2 migrant deaths. Any death, we should make a big deal out of it. In the past 2 years, under this administration's policies, under Mayorkas's reckless behavior, reckless, border policies, 1,400 migrants have died. Here's one just floating in the river. 1,400. We talk about it was a humanitarian crisis in the previous administration. Nothing now. 1,400. Over 1,400. Yes, this is Mayorkas's failure. Mr. Lamb, or Sheriff Lamb, I'd like to start with you today. Mr. Beer was mentioning some statistics about who's carrying the drugs into the country. Those carpet shoes you showed earlier, do you think those are counted in his statistics? The video that I showed earlier of all this just parade of people carrying drugs into our country, are they counted in his statistics?
Mr. Chairman, no, sir. And I find it comical that a lot of researchers and politicians like to tell us what's going on the border, but they don't ever come down to the border to actually see it in person. We're telling you statistics that we see every day. Here's the remnants of it. This tells you everything you need to know, and I've got thousands of these in hundreds of spots throughout my county.
Yeah, those aren't in the statistics, and they're certainly not coming through the ports of entry, are they, Sheriff Lamb?
No, they are not coming through the ports of entry.
Okay. Thank you. Rebecca, I really appreciate you being here, and I know the difficulty of you being here. One of our fellow witnesses today, Sheriff Lamb, mentioned and talked about the flow of fentanyl. He's 55 miles from the border. You're in Michigan, I think, right? Quite a ways from the border. Do you mind elaborating a little bit on how it's impacted your community? And I mean, you shared your story, but you're with other parents who've lost their children. Can you share the story of how it's impacting your community?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, in the support groups, there have been some parents who have committed suicide, siblings who have. It's devastating families. It's been very difficult for my daughters. One daughter, she went off to Michigan State and came home after semester. It was just too painful. Now she is attending in our hometown at Oakland University. One of my son's friends was waiting tables at the same restaurant where my daughter was, and I went to eat there last summer, and he came up to me and he said that he had been friends with both of my sons, but really good friends with Kyler. And I remember they had worked together for a while. And he told me that he got clean from drugs after my son's deaths. And he said he completely stopped doing marijuana, in fact. Like he stopped doing any kind of drugs. He said, I want you to know that your son's death started a movement in our hometown. And he said, so that when people show up with pills, they're ostracized and they're condemned, But he said, but I think, for how long? How many of the kids in the high schools now know about my son's deaths?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Kiesling, I'm sure I expressed the sentiment of every member on this committee about your tragic loss. I'm a grandfather, and it would be difficult for any loss for a child or a grandchild. So, Mr. Beer, there's a comment that our immigration system has been broken for many years. If what we are seeing at the border now a consequence of that broken system, and if it is, can you kind of share your thoughts on it?
Absolutely, it's a consequence of our broken legal immigration system. If people have a legal opportunity to come to this country, then they do not choose the illegal option. And so what we're seeing at the border is a direct consequence of the decades-long restrictions on legal immigration and legal pathways to come to this country. We have, for example, no year-round temporary work visa for people to come do year-round work in lower-skilled industries. And that is what is driving all of this. Ultimately, what funds smuggler fees and payments, what brings people to the border, whether they're seeking asylum or not. Ultimately, the financing comes from jobs in the United States where there's economic demand for people. And if we had a legal way to fill those jobs, we would not see the crisis that we're seeing at our southern border. And so we have countless examples of instances in which we have stopped illegal immigration by opening up legal channels. We did so in the 1950s with the Bracero Guest Worker Program, which despite its flaws, reduced the amount of illegal immigration by over 90% and kept it very low. It was done away with, and what replaced it was decades of illegal immigration to U.S. farms.
Thank you much. As I said in my opening statement, fixing our broken immigration system will not only help migrants fleeing persecution and poverty, but it'll also help us manage our border, human smuggling, put them out of business, free law enforcement to focus on drug smugglers, and strengthen our economy. I represent a predominantly agricultural district in Mississippi. The migrant labor force is a key to that economy staying healthy. If we can't create a system that allow those individuals to come, whether it's gin and cotton, whether it's picking, harvesting sweet potatoes or whatever, it's a challenge for our farmers. So somewhere we need to put a system in place to make that happen. And I look forward to working with this committee on trying to get that comprehensive immigration reform system put together. Can you explain how more legal pathways to this country would be helpful, not just to migrants, but to America?
Oh, absolutely. First of all, we are dealing with this significant inflation crisis in this country. And the lost productivity that I talked about, the $1 trillion in lost productivity from unfilled open jobs in this country over the last year, would go a long way to reduce prices of goods and services across the economy. When employers can't fill positions, that is lost productivity that comes right out of consumers' pockets. And so the most important economic phenomenon is the fact that we are turning away economic growth by turning away immigrants. And if we want to fill these positions, if we want to expand growth, if we want to bring down inflation, one of the best ways to do so would be to have a legal immigration process for people to enter the country lawfully. And of course, at our borders, we are seeing serious problems. There's no question there are issues at the border as a result of illegal immigration. But with a legal immigration platform for people to apply and cross legally, those problems would be greatly dissipated. We talked about car chases that are injuring Americans. We're talking about recruitment of teenagers to take part in smuggling activities of persons. Those problems would also dissipate under a legal immigration system that actually worked and served the needs of American communities.
Okay, well, if we go another round, I might have another question. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. I now recognize Chairman Higgins from Louisiana for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, it's nauseating to listen to some of this. It's really stunning. I don't know where they find these people that don't get it. Like breed these people in laboratory experiments or something. You're disconnected from reality. It was just a couple of years ago we had the border under control. You whine on about broken immigration systems. What Western nation? Who? Canada? France? Germany? Great Britain? Mexico? All of them have much more restrictive immigration programs and laws than the United States of America. We're the most generous, compassionate, wealthy Western nation in the world for immigration. We want citizens of every land to come to this country legally. Our border is wide open and out of control, and Americans are dying because of it. And I know Secretary Mayorkas is watching this or having his team of attorneys watch this. Good. Because over the course of the next year, this committee is going to lay out the case against you, sir. If I could arrest you for violations of Louisiana revised statutes, I would. Louisiana revised statute 1432, negligent homicide. Louisiana revised statute 1424, principal to any criminal action. I charge you with thousands of murders as principal too. 18 U.S. Code 1001, you certainly knowingly and willfully lied to this body again and again and again about our border. Section 242, Title 18, under color of law, you've deprived Americans of their very life, including this young lady. The picture behind me, that's Sammy. She's just a little girl, dead from fentanyl. It came under your watch, Secretary Mayorkas. Remember her name. I'm going to see to it that you have plenty of time in the course of your remaining life to remember the names of the 200,000 Americans who are dead because of fentanyl coming across a border that you have blown wide open. Sheriff Lamb, thank you for being here, sir. I'm sure you understand my passion, having to listen to this nonsense. We could fix our border in 1 week. Am I right, Sheriff? If we had policy coming out of the White House that allow you to enforce the law and empower the federal agents on our border that are tasked with securing the sovereignty of our nation against the criminal cartels that control 100% of the Mexican side of our southern border. Could we do it, Sheriff Lamb? Had we done it before as recently as 2019?
Yes, Mr. Higgins, we could do that. Maybe a week might be tight, but 30 to 60 days, we could definitely fix this. We're America. We can stop this when we decide we want to stop it.
When we make a decision to enforce existing law, we can flip this thing around. Sheriff Lamb, in my remaining minute, it's a very disturbing development that we've been watching over the course of the last year or so. These guys crossing the border are increasingly violent, and your men, your deputies are encountering that. Will you characterize the demeanor and and purpose of a typical getaway that you encounter in your town, and expound upon the increased violence that you're witnessing from these men.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Higgins. Absolutely. We are seeing increased violence more and more. The ranchers along the border very fear for their lives every day. These are military-age men that are avoiding detection at all costs. Many have paid between $6,000 and $12,000 to come here, and that's a lot of money to them, and they're not going back, and they're not going to go down without a fight. We've had traffic stops where they've tried to run my deputies off the road while we're trying to stop a load vehicle. A secondary vehicle will try to run them off the road. We had one such vehicle. We chased all the way back to Phoenix to find it was a female with a 1.5-year-old child and a 5-month-old child in her car with her. Violence is absolutely an option for these people. They have zero regard for human life.
Thank you, Sheriff. Mr.